Comics have always been woke. Superheroes have always been social justice warriors. There are many statements that are coming out of the industry. In light of these statements, I wanted to make a video that talks about the fact that the X-Men, what are they and how do they fit into this entire narrative?
I wanted to call it the mutants. Went to my publisher, he said, you cannot call it the mutants, nobody knows what a mutant is.
Now you can get all of your superhero stuff from Noon and Namshi, not only in Saudi Arabia but other countries of the GCC. All you need is to use my promo code SOJ1 on both Noon and Namshi. But remember, my Noon code works only for cashbacks in Saudi Arabia and UAE, whereas my Namshi code works for the entire GCC region. So you're looking for superhero t-shirts, you're looking for action figures, you're looking for accessories, anything you name it, you can get it straight up from Noon and Namshi. And the best part about it is you either get cashback or you get good discounts. As we are approaching towards the release of Deadpool 3, which is now renamed to Deadpool and Wolverine, and the relaunch of X-Men the Animated Series, which has been renamed to X-Men 97, what has now been propagated is the fact that X-Men have always been about anti-discrimination. They have been most woke representation. This is what is being claimed, that they are exactly all about the Rainbow Brigade. Were these true to begin with? Was that the case? What was Stan Lee thinking when he was writing stories for the X-Men? Did Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, the creators of X-Men, did they intend to create a team that was all about SJW causes, was all about civil rights, that was all about anti-discrimination? I will be taking you through the history. The first statement that's always being propagated by the far left side of the comic book industry as well as the comic book industry media is that the X-Men have been proper representation of a team that is fighting against discrimination, that is fighting against persecution, that is about diversity, that is about all-inclusiveness. Well, firstly, the X-Men were created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby after they got inspired by DC's title Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol was a big hit until it went on to the back burner and it became a cult classic till today. Both of them wanted to create a team of super-powered beings whom Stan wanted to call, instead of X-Men, he wanted to call them mutants. The publisher, Martin Goodman, at the time, he said that nobody knows mutants, so you have to come up with a better name. And because Stan Lee and Jack Kirby had created the character Professor X, Professor Xavier, so they used the X of Xavier and renamed the team to X-Men. Now, it didn't have anything to do with biology, it didn't have anything to do with the chromosome or whatever. It was just simple. Professor Xavier is the founder of the team, he is the leader of the team, so his letter that comes in his first name is going to be defining his team, the X-Men. Secondly, what was the purpose? Why did the X-Men exist in the first place? Because Stan Lee, obviously, this is the 1960s, the Marvel age has already begun with Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. They wanted to create some more titles that would basically be able to help them in competing with their bigger rival, DC Comics. DC Comics, who, as I've said, was publishing Doom Patrol. They were also publishing Justice League of America. Quite frankly, they were the industry giants. So they needed some good content that was out there. And to save time, because Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were not just working on the X-Men, they were working on other titles at Marvel, they needed to avoid telling the origin story of each and every character that is involved within these books. Meaning that we all know the origin of Captain America Rogers, a scrawny little kid from Brooklyn. He gets admitted into the super soldier program and he gets that serum, he becomes Captain America. So to avoid all of that, how a superhero has gotten their power, Stan Lee wanted to create a group of superheroes whereby they were born with powers, and these powers could be anything. Somebody is shooting a laser out of his eyes. So to save time on basically justifying that how they had gained their superpowers, they just came up with the idea that what if there are individuals who are born with superpowers? It doesn't matter what their superpower is. But the most important bit was the bit about Magneto. And when we look at Magneto today, we see him as an anti-hero. And he is the Holocaust survivor. He was in the Auschwitz concentration camp. His family was persecuted by the Nazis for being Jewish. And what made it even worse was that he was a mutant also. So we need to ask ourselves, when did this anti-discrimination diversity bit started to happen? It all started with Chris Claremont, where he took the angle which was basically started by Roy Thomas and Neil Adams when the X-Men were being blamed for the murder of Bolivar Trask, whose son then starts the Sentinel program, Project Wide Awake, and they started to get persecuted. But until that point, the X-Men were all about introspection. And when I say introspection, what I mean to say is that there are evil mutants out there who have a superiority complex led by Magneto and who believe in the subjugation of human race. These were the lines that were drawn by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby when it came to putting up X-Men on one side and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants on the other side. The other bit is that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, now were they pretty much inspired by what was going on in the United States at the time, because the 1960s were all about civil rights? Were Stan Lee and Jack Kirby inspired by the initial rivalry that existed between Martin Luther King on one side and the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X, on the other? Well, that certainly is not the case at all, because having read X-Men #1 myself, of course I don't own the original first print, but the reprints that are there, anyone can now download them online, or they can buy the facsimile edition or go for the omnibus for that matter. Read for yourselves what exactly Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were thinking at the time. Now, what was done by Chris Claremont is not something that is blameworthy, because by the end of the day, Chris Claremont, in my humble opinion, and I'm sure many will agree with me, is the greatest X-Men writer, and I call him an X-Men legend when it came to the stories, and when he took upon these angles, when he brought about the issue of Holocaust, how it affected the mutants themselves, starting with Kitty Pryde, who comes from an American Jewish background, and it makes her even realize that there is a lot of pain out there, that people are not just getting persecuted because they are born with natural superpowers, but also for just being of a particular ethnicity. Mind you that Judaism is a religion and Jewishness is an ethnicity. These two statements that are heavily pushed by sites like Comic Book Resources or comicbooks.com. Do they hold any truth to them? Even a legend like Mark Waid is a believer in the fact that comic books have always been woke, that comic books have always been about social justice. He has had a spate with individuals who actually called out against those writers who are bringing in their personal politics and personal social beliefs into the comics and thereby ruining the characters beyond repair.
So these new writers don't have the love of comics like these older writers had. And all they care about is, how can I put myself in the book? No, we don't care what you would do if you were Iron Man. We don't care who you are. You're writing Tony Stark. You're not writing yourself in a book. If that's the case, write your own comic with you in it. No one will read it because nobody cares. People grew up, are growing up loving Peter Parker, loving Miles Morales, loving all these Captain America. We don't need you to put your input in it. Just write Steve Rogers. Don't write Steve Rogers. What would Steve Rogers be if I was Steve Rogers? That's not how it works. But that's again how most of these new people write nowadays. That's why most of the because we don't care what you would do, because we don't care about your life whatsoever. Just write a book, get paid for what you do, get paid for what you're supposed to be doing, and make it a good story.
He along with many others, they represent a particular class who just simply say that it's okay for us to misrepresent facts, it's okay to come up with a revisionist history of the famous characters, when in fact there are multiple clips out there in which Stan Lee is talking about what transpired, what inspired him and Jack Kirby to create the X-Men. And it's not just about the X-Men, it's about every other Marvel character that's out there. I will say every other DC Comics character that is out there. In case of Superman, we have to make a certain exception, because having known what I have learned over the years, that Superman was actually born out of the frustration of two Jewish teenagers who were seeing the anti-immigrant hysteria in the United States before World War II, the Voyage of the Damned, where German European Jewish people who escaped from Europe to flee persecution from the Nazis, they were not allowed to enter the United States. They were not given asylum, and thus they were sent back, and they ended up in the concentration camps, and the rest, as we all know, is history. So in Superman, we can say that yes, that it was these events primarily that inspired Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster to create the icon, the Superman, whereby the values this hero would have would be from the prophets. As comic book historian Roy Schwartz, who has had the privilege of actually reading the manuscript, which was written by Jerry Siegel himself, what were his inspiration when it came to Superman? The first one was Prophet Moses, whom we refer to as Musa in Arabic. Prophet Musa, peace be upon him and his family. But still, what values that were actually instilled by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster into Superman were about truth, justice, and selflessness. Yes, many of us grew up in an era where Superman was defined by truth, justice, and the American way, but if you go to the origin, these were the three things that were there, because these are the prophetic values that redefined the concept of heroism. Because before Superman, the concept of heroism was a person who was in pursuit of his or her ego. The X-Men and many other characters that came about from different companies, but since our focus is on the X-Men, they also are representing those values. They are about truth, they are about justice, they are about being selfless. And when we say selfless, it takes a great deal of courage to stand up against your own, knowing that that person is about to inflict some wrong on people who are different to you. And again, I would like to highlight that particular panel where Professor Xavier is introducing his X-Men. He is introducing them to the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which is led by Magneto. Yes, the same Magneto who gets redefined by Chris Claremont, later by Scott Lobdell, and all the way to Greg Pak as a Holocaust survivor who somehow develops an anger against human beings, and that's where he drives his hatred from. So the reality is that he is not a bad guy essentially, but what he saw, what him and his family had gone through during those concentration camps, what he saw with his own eyes, that broke him from within. Thus, it made him realize that in order to have peace in the world, mutants should rule over humans. That was his basically solution, ends justifying the means. But this was not the case at all. The X-Men, like any other superhero, even to this day, even any superhero team, they are all about truth, justice, and selflessness. Scratch all of the things, and deep down inside, this is what you're going to find. This is the greatness which Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster gave to us in the form of Superman, and which people like Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, John Romita in Marvel Comics, Kane, Bill Finger and DC Comics, Gardner Fox, they all took these core foundations of superheroes and developed so many characters, so many superhero teams that became the favorites of millions around the world. The reason why their stories actually mesmerize us, it's because of their values, not because of their identity, not because of their orientation, not because of their skin color, not because of their ethnicity. It may ruffle some feathers with those who are into the far left ideology, and then of course we also have the far right individuals, but there has a lot that has been said, and the reason I'm making this video is it's just my small attempt to basically save the industry, because the comic book sales are declining, and we know it because right now local comic book stores in the United States, their owners are actually uploading videos, they are giving interviews, they are saying that people are not buying the books like they used to, people are canceling their subscription orders, people are not buying into the new stuff that is being pushed out. And this narrative that is being pushed out by those who are in DC as well as in Marvel, and I'm not saying all of them, some are producing phenomenal work when it comes to our favorite superheroes, but sadly with what has been done, it's just damaging our characters. The Krakoan era is coming to an end, the Krakoan saga is coming to an end, which was started by Jonathan Hickman. And believe me, if you haven't read House of X and Powers of X, you have missed a great deal. The way Jonathan Hickman had started out with this arc was just amazing, and then next thing you know, Jonathan Hickman was not able to continue to bring it to the end, to the right conclusion. What people like Mark Millar are saying, what people like Eric D. July are saying, and I agree with them wholeheartedly, is the fact that you need to bring on board people who understand superheroes. And yes, they have redefined superheroes for modern audiences, but they know how to strike a balance. They know that superheroes, by the end of the day, when it comes to the social issues, as Stan has himself said in an interview, that he keeps the social issues running in the background.
Didn't matter if you were of the white race, the black race, the brown race, or whatever. So social issues I try to get in the background or underlaying a plot, but never to the point of letting it interfere with the story or hitting the reader over the head.
Not something that becomes the main story itself, because this is not what sells. This has been the case always. And comic books, despite the digitization that's happening, despite the world becoming entirely digital, there is a thing about comics that there will be a sizable segment of population that wants to read them in print, that wants to own the omnibus in print, because the experience of a comic book, you cannot experience that digitally with the art and everything. Since the Krakoan saga is coming to a conclusion because the sales have dropped, people are not liking the angles that are being taken, the focus is getting shifted away from the X-Men's struggle against their own and against external forces who are out there to persecute them. It has shifted to things like the relationship between Mystique and Destiny. I mean, this is not something that should be at the forefront. This should be running at the background, if you will. So many people are there who are great storytellers. They need to be brought on board as editors so that they can give the orientation to these young writers. And it's always a blessing to have differences of opinion, diversity of thought that leads to something great that's out there. The X-Men became a success in the 80s because of a person like Chris Claremont and John Byrne. John Byrne is known to be having strong opinions. Chris Claremont was somebody who identified more on the left side of things. But just look at the quality of work they have produced. The X-Men run by Chris Claremont and Byrne cannot be replicated. It gave us so much more. It doesn't matter what a person's political social beliefs are, because what that is affecting the world outside. But when it comes to comic books and our favorite superheroes, they have to be about heroism, the core foundations that were given to us by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and the way they were redefined by the great Stan Lee, wherein he showed people that being a superhero, having a superpower, it's not a privilege. It's a burden, it's a curse, it's something that can ruin your life completely. That is what it is. That is the reason why Stan Lee is considered great, because the way he redefined superheroes, the standard that was set by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. One of the fact was that, that led to every superhero being tall, handsome, the best, if you will, okay, and they would be having the most beautiful lady by their side. But Stan Lee said, hold on a second, if Fantastic Four needs to look like, needs to represent the dysfunction that exists within a family. Spider-Man is a teenager who is going through teenage issues, who is going through bullying at school, and at the same time he gets bitten by the radioactive spider, and then he ends up becoming Spider-Man. And lo and behold, it's not just he comes across a supervillain like Green Goblin, it's the fact that the Green Goblin and Spider-Man, they have so much personal enmity between each other. These things could not have come about because of people's own political and social beliefs. They just came out because these are the issues, these are the values that resonate with the silent majority that's out there. It doesn't matter what your religion is, it doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, it's these values that bring us together. So these are the two biggest lies that I wanted to address, and I hope you guys found this video very useful. If you like this video, please hit the like, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.